Welcome to an E39 source video. Today, my car is hibernating over there as it rains here in San Diego. Today we're working on Nate's 2001 E39 M5. You guys have seen it on the channel in a couple productions. Beautiful car. This one's a titanium silver. We've got 2B exhaust on it, and today's a maintenance day. So we've got the car in the air, safely lifted, suspended, at a perfect working height. I want to give a quick shout out on a great product ECS offers here. So this little solid metal, whatever kind of metal it is, solid adapter is absolutely perfect for using a lift, such as we are, or a jack, or even jack stands. You can sandwich it in there. So this guy has the perfect dimension here that it actually fits up in the jack pad adapter like that. Provides a perfect lift, so you're not going to mar up your jack adapters. You don't have to worry about it sliding nearly as much. It's a great little product. I'll leave a link to the part in the description below. And we're going to get in here today, talk about replacing the flex disc, the center support bearing on the drive shaft, which is hidden up in there above the exhaust and heat shielding. And then while we have this apart, we're going to do the E60 545i short shift kit, new shifter carrier bushings, etc. So step one, after the car is in the air, is to remove some of this underbody shielding. I like to call this one the Patrick Star, because that's who it looks like when it's off. So we'll get down here. You can see that it is quite simply held into place with a number of Phillips head screws. And these are captive screws. So when you turn them, say quarter turn, half turn, they should stay in place. If they fall out of place, you're missing what's known as an axial retaining clip, which you can purchase easily online. And there is the Patrick Star with a paper bag over his head. So with the Patrick Star off, we've got a great look looking towards the rear of the vehicle right now. First things that we've done are remove some exhaust hangers, which were right here. This side, bank 2, kind of had a replaced part that was pretty clean. Bank 1, original, not so clean at all. The first head broke off, the second one rounded, and then what'd you use, just a pry bar?
I just smashed it with a hammer and a pry bar, yeah.
That'll work, yeah, we'll get some fresh parts in here shortly. But for now, you've just got to get that loose because we do need to remove the exhaust system to access this. So then, why don't you tell us what you're working on right here?
So I'm just removing the hanger mount that mounts to the bottom of the transmission. Once we get that out, it's going to be attacking these header flanges, and then it's going to be probably dropping the rest of the exhaust as a whole. So it's going to be these bolts here that hold the subframe braces, and then the bolts that hold the rear mufflers in.
Rear muffler.
We'll just drop it all the easiest way.
Yeah, most of these. Now these are 2B mufflers, so if you've got stock or Eisenman or Dinan or whatever, it's going to be a little bit different. But for the most part, I believe they're 13mm nuts at each hanger point. Yep. These rubber things are your hanger points. So still in the name of freeing up the exhaust system, we talked about the clamps here. Those are released. There's going to be 4 13mm bolts right here holding your chassis braces to your center exhaust brace. There's another 13mm bolt back here holding, yeah, much longer bolt. You can't misplace that. You hit some penetrating oil in here. You kind of have a little groove that if you have that red spout, you can spray the bolt in there, give it a few minutes. If you're working on a California car that hasn't seen rust or hasn't seen snow and has any rust like this Chicago, once upon a time Chicago car did, it'll be a little bit easier. But muscle it, use a 6-point socket, never a 12 on this stuff that hasn't moved in a while, and you'll get it out. By the time you get around to the back, the mufflers are held in, I think as I mentioned before, with 6 nuts on each side. So there's 2 over here, 2 and 2, that makes 6 for this side. Same deal over here. On the far outside, you're going to need a U-joint to get in there. As you can see, this hardware is quite rusty and has been a bit of a problem here this morning, but I think we're one away, right?
Yep, one away, and we're going to drop it and make sure it doesn't smash on the floor.
Yeah, then we don't want to drop the whole thing. It will be heavy. So there's a stud that goes into the chassis, and then there's a nut that threads on the end of the stud. And we've actually gotten the stud coming out with the nut attached to it. So that works too, but ideally the nut's supposed to come off of the stud at each different mount. You can see that one is just kind of stuck in the hanger. Before we're going to drop the entire exhaust system here and ignore the crude catch can as a support here. I know that's not ideal, but obviously your oxygen sensors are going to need to be disconnected from one of their 2 points. One is to just disconnect them electrically. There's 2 black 10mm plastic nuts that hold these electrical housings up on the chassis. I couldn't get that one to come off, so we released the one, popped the connectors out, and then there's two little tabs that need to be pulled away from the housing on each plug. Once you do that, you'll be able to pull the electrical part of the connection out. That seems to be the easiest. Trying to remove them here, if you're taking them out, replace them. Do yourself a favor. They're gonna need to be done eventually anyways, unless they're brand new. Just replace them, they're not that expensive. So now we've got the 4 oxygen sensors free, and the chassis brace is free. We could not get it to come out of here, so just slide them to the side so the exhaust can drop freely down as such. And then in the back, we were able to get all of the nuts out holding the mufflers up. So at this point, we're ready to carefully remove the entire exhaust system, which is going to be at least a 2-man job. A few hours later, the exhaust system's out. How'd that go, Nate?
Oh, that was fun.
It was fun, to say the least.
To say the least.
So, really, you know, all of these bolts back here, not so bad. Over here, not so bad. Just be careful. Here's the problem. So obviously all these outer ones sheared off, so we're gonna have a blast getting those out. This always happens too, you know, even if they haven't been, if they have been replaced, if they haven't, I don't think these are original. They looked a little bit too fresh to be original.
This one's been drilled out before.
They're certainly not new. So plan on drilling or cutting. They leave the side of that open for a reason. You can just slice them with a grinder and then get the rest of it out later. But these inner two are the problem. See, they've got this flange, this seal gasket, whatever you want to call it. It almost looks like very highly compact aluminum foil. So that's what just took forever. So we ended up buying this propane tank over at Lowe's. And what was the magic number there? About 275 degrees?
Yeah, 250 or something like that.
250, 275 on the headers. And then kind of the key was standing here in the back, holding the whole system, and then rocking it back and forth. And you know, you need 2 guys in the back, 1 guy in the front. The whole system, 2 guys can easily lift. It's just awkward here when it's under the car.
This whole process is just to remove the CSB, which is at the center of this drive shaft here. So there are 2 8mm bolts here, and then there's 2 more here, 1 there and 1 here on this heat shield, and there's 2 more up at the front here. And all those have to come down. Wow, that's crusty. All that stuff's coming down to take the shield off, then we can get to the drive shaft.
We had to cut some of those 8mm head screws off as well, but finally that comes down. Nate's going to give us a demo of the problem, why we're replacing the center support bearing. It is completely trashed.
Yeah, you're not supposed to be able to do this at all.
No. Well, if we get in on it, we can see that the rubber there is just shredded.
Yeah, destroyed.
So those are 13mm nuts. We hit them with some PB Blaster. It looks like it came off very easily.
Yep.
Let's see how that second one comes. Same thing. So we'll have that out in no time. For Driveshaft removal, we're working firstly at the transmission here. Counter holding the back nut with a 21mm open-ended crescent wrench. Then a 6-point socket on a ratchet. Is that half drive?
Half-inch drive.
Probably has half drive just due to the torque application. So.
Ooh, yeah.
There's 3 of them, there's 6 total. If you're gonna replace your flex disc, Guibo, whatever you wanna call the black disc in there, you're gonna have to do all 6. There's 3 of them that hold the drive shaft to the black disc, and then 3 more that hold the black disc to the transmission output shaft. So there'll be a total of 6. If you're just removing the drive shaft to replace your center support bearing, just have to do those 3. We talked about the center support bearing on the back. Here at the differential, it's attached with 6 bolts. They are 5/8 or 16mm. Put the car in gear. First gear, pull the parking brake, and then we used an open-ended wrench. Requires a good bit of torque to get those nuts off. And then as far as separating this CV joint here, I would recommend replacement, but separating it from the differential input shaft, you can use a pry bar or a flathead screwdriver. There's 2 grooves. Are they 180 degrees? Yeah, so you have to rotate it, and then it just pries off of the diff input shaft. With all of the bolts removed, we're ready to take the drive shaft out, which right now is crudely held in with 1 remaining 13mm bolt at the center support bearing.
She's coming down. And so she'll fold the middle, pull off the back here, like so. Have some grease right there.
Yum.
And pull forward.
Okay. Done with drive shaft removal. Now we move on to taking the old center support bearing off of the drive shaft. This one, you might think you'd be able to slide it over there until you get to the end and There's no way. It's not how it's supposed to work, and you'd never get the new one on. So there is an 18mm bolt in the U-joint on the transmission side of the drive shaft. So obviously we're going to need an open-ended wrench for that. Before you disassemble the drive shaft, pull the two pieces apart, you do want to take some sort of white marker, something that won't get wiped off easily, and kind of make a line or make a mark that tells you which way to put it back together when you're doing the reassembly between the two pieces of the drive shaft. So that 18mm in there takes a while because you have to use an open wrench like that. Once we got it loose enough, I went and used a 3/4. I just tool setup I have. It was a ratcheting wrench. That worked better. It doesn't fit as well, but it was faster. So you get the nut out. It's in good practice to replace that. So for that 18mm bolt and then the fat washer going into the drive shaft, I've got some part numbers for you here. The washer part number there in blue, 26111226237, and the hex bolt part number is 071199119694. You'll need one of each. So if you're doing the center support bearing and part of it stays on the drive shaft, like what's happening for us, you're just going to need a flathead screwdriver, pry it in between, and force it off.
The bearing itself is probably going to be pulled on the have to be pulled from the drive shaft. So we're getting the outer bearing casing off that holds the actual rubber part. And then we have to remove the physical bearing itself.
Bearing separator and puller set. This one's from Harbor Freight.
Oh yeah, you can rent it from AutoZone, O'Reilly's, your local auto parts store, Advanced Auto Parts, something like that.
Right. So this is going to be to get the actual bearing off of the drive shaft.
If it's taking a lot of force, use some heat. This honestly should not require that much force. It should be like a 3/8 ratchet with a 17mm, that's the size of this, on the end, and it should pull right off. I'm bracing against the old bolt that we are replacing because I do not want to destroy the threads or the splines on the drive shaft. It's free.
Off she comes. So on the new center support bearing here, it is not completely symmetrical. It does make a difference which way it goes on. I'll let Nate talk about that.
So yeah, so we got the flat side here. This is going to go towards the back of the car, the back of the drive shaft. So this, I don't know, protective sleeve goes on this way. So it's going to slide on right to the point where the chamfer or the cut is, and then you're just going to press it on with a, you could use like a big socket or anything really that's just going to tap a little bit lightly on each side until it hammers home. There's a very distinct noise you get, so we're going to just hammer it basically. This is just a drive extension, so that'll be easily. But you're just going to tap it back and forth on either side, preferably on the metal casing and not on the rubber, so it doesn't distort the rubber. As soon as you'll hear it hit the back, the noise will change completely, and you'll absolutely know that it's home.
Let's talk about the part numbers here. So part number 7 is the main center support bearing. That's part number, BMW part number 26122228917. You'll need one of those. It's held on with 2 nuts, part number 8. 26117574872. Then we've got part number 10, that's a shim. That's part number 26111227583. And then finally we have Butyl tape. This stuff sits in between the center support bearing and the chassis. You're going to want to scrape off all of the old stuff before applying the new. That's part number 9, 26127511140. So the drive shaft's back together, the 18mm and the nut slide back in fairly easily. There's not a torque spec for that. There's no way you could even torque it, just make it good and tight. For some reason the new bolt's a 19. The old one came out an 18, the new one's a 19. Now we're going to move on to the flex joint, the Guibo, whatever. Guibo. We've got
6 bolts.
3 more bolts here, I guess, seeing the drive shafts out of here. This one, you can see all the cracking in it. Yeah. That's not good. Rubber dries out, it gets old, it cracks. So we're going to be replacing that. 2 of them are already out. And Nate, I'll let you talk about what socket and wrench setup here works.
Yeah, so I'm having to use a 21mm wrench, a combo wrench. I'm just putting that on the back side. I'm having Ryan climb the ladder every single time we have to do this to put the car in neutral, rotating the transmission until it's right about here, holding the back of it because that's the only way I can get purchase on the back of the nut, and then loosening with a 21mm on the front.
21 6-point for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
So the Guibo is now out of here. We can move on to the shifter carrier, bushings, unicorn nuggets, all of that good stuff. We're going to be putting a E60 545i shifter in here. It's the same one that I have in my M5 over there. It is by far my favorite shifter that I have experienced on the E39 so far. The UUC Evo 3, overpriced.
Yeah.
Overpriced rubbish. So we're not going that way. So step one, Nate, why don't you kind of introduce the different parts up here and just give them a name so they know what we're talking about.
Yeah, so we got the rod end joint. We're going to be replacing that today. We've got the little clips, the circlips here that hold on to the selector rod. This is the selector rod. This is going to stay stock. However, the E6545 short shifter, which will go in here, will replace the yellow plastic washers. We're also replacing this shifter carrier bushing, and up here at the very top of the transmission, which is kind of hard to get to, we'll be replacing those rubber bushings, which cause a lot of movement in the shifter.
There's a lot of play in here right now. I mean, it's not horrible. I've seen worse, but there's a lot of slop and play in this shifter. This is a 162,000 mile car, and we have no reason to believe that any of this has ever been replaced.
Yeah.
So I'll add in shifter carrier, basic. That's the part that that does not move. This is the selector rod. If you have somebody go in there and start moving, you're going to see that pushing the selector shaft on the transmission. So
and we're also replacing the shifter ball and the shifter ball bushing.
Yeah, the cup and the ball, and all of that's going to be new. So why don't we pull this circlip off, get the selector rod out of here. There's another circlip over here. We'll get that out of the way, and then move on to the carrier bushings. So the selecting rod's out of the way on both ends. In fact, you've removed that completely.
Yeah, you just pull the circlips apart and pull them down, and then wiggle the thing out. It helps if you press something like that against it. It'll pop right out. Just wiggle it out.
Now we move on to the
shifter carrier bushing.
Rearmost carrier bushing.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
The shifter carrier bushing is pried out of place, so you have to pry it out of place. There's two grooves on either side of it. I can see you've already made it loose, but what you have to do is get a big pry bar like this or something similar, tuck it up behind the edge there, and just start pressing. You can press against this transmission tunnel here, it won't hurt it. So just press it and it'll go pop, and it'll pop down.
Beautiful. Now we're inside the car. That was fun to do on a lift, and shifter is not connected to anything, so it's time to remove that. That's very simple. Doesn't matter if you've got the wood, the leather, the aluminum, fake carbon fiber, whatever. I like to start over here on the right side. You just kind of push in and up. That all comes out like this. That reveals the wiring harness. This is an M5, so it's an illuminated shifter. This is a facelift car, so it's white. If your car's a 2000 or earlier, say you're on a 540, well, the 540 won't be illuminated, but the 2000 M5 will have a larger black harness that will probably take two hands. Nope, did it with one. Comes off like that. The wood and leather shifter coming off of the actual aluminum shifter. Sometimes this is easy, sometimes this is hard. Generally what I do is open the sunroof all the way, stick my head out the sunroof, sit right here, right leg over there, left leg over here, and just pull straight up. And sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's not. It will come off. But of course, make sure you disconnect your wiring harness before that, or you're going to rip the entire loom out of the car, and that's no good for anybody. Then, when we get that out of here, this is just some sound insulation. This peels back. There's nothing holding this in, aside from the friction against the center console. So you're just going to pull that up. And then, of course, with the shifter here, that will slide out of the way. Then we've got this big black grommet thing that kind of just pushes in towards the center, and then that'll slide out. You might want to wear some gloves, that thing's dirty. Okay, so it turns out this car wasn't so bad. I sat up here and just kind of half-assed it and it came out. So there's the shifter and the insulation. Then Nate just pulled the rest of it out from underneath, and that leaves us a hole looking down to the ground. To get the engine side of the shifter carrier out, it's got this annoying pin that's up there. We've already taken it out, but for video's sake, we're going to do it again. So the pin sits in there like that. And Nate can take over.
It's this little clip at the end here sits over this piece of aluminum. I just took a pry bar, lifted up, and then squeezed this on the far side, pressed a little bit, and then just wiggled it out.
And the pin slides out. Then you're going to be able to take the entire shifter carrier out of here. The only old part we still have is this little joint on the gear selector right there above the hole with the rust on it. That part will still need to be replaced. So here's the shifter carrier as it would appear in the car. That's the engine side where the pin is that we just showed you. That's the pin in the back that goes into the rear bushing that we showed you. This is the old part. We're replacing that with a E39 530 part, seeing that it is about 1/10 the cost or less, and it appears to be absolutely identical. We'll let you know more on that later. These two bushings here in the front, the rubber ones, they're responsible for a lot of play, and we're going to be putting in Jed's unicorn nuggets today, which are a solid piece, so they're not going to deteriorate like the rubber will. Now we've got the shifter out, we've still got the cup in there. The cup is going to rotate. We've been bashing it, but there's a better way. It rotates Either way, there's kind of a lock and an unlock position that you can see through these little grooves on the side of the carrier. There's a bit of plastic that sticks out and prevents it from lifting out. So we'll rotate it so the grooves are pushed in, then it will lift out. Getting the cup out of the carrier is actually easiest using a flathead screwdriver in the window. I just rotated it just enough that the wider part moved over into the cylinder and then pushed it from the other side, and that popped right out. So we can clean up the carrier. We're going to be reusing that. There's no need to replace it. Now we're going to take a look at the new shifter, the E6545i on the left, and the original stock E39 M5 shifter on the right. At first glance they look extremely similar, but if we notice the distance from the shifter ball down to the point where the selector rod will attach is notably longer on the 545i, and then it's also a good 1/4 to 1/2 inch shorter in general length, assuming that it's justified at the ball position, which would be natural for this. So that actually feels a lot different, even though it doesn't look that different. So we used some needle nose, a screwdriver, and a flamethrower to take out the old bushings here at the engine side of the shifter carrier. Use whatever works. They're just pieces of rubber. There's no sleeve or anything in there. You can replace them with the rubber ones. That's what I've done on my car. So far, so good. If you want a completely permanent solution, the unicorn nuggets are probably going to be your friend here. They come as a two-piece
set for $60.
two-piece set for how much?
$60.
$60 from Jed. And
pricing subject to change, obviously.
Sure. It looks like, are they going to
they'll fit. They're just
snap
they're
in there?
Yeah, they're snug.
Okay. Yeah, I've never used them before, so this is my first Unicorn Einhorn Industries product experience.
So these will slide in as soon as I get that one seated. Put the longer one on the outside. And then this is a modification I made myself, actually. When these products were first introduced, I used a lock washer on an M10 bolt, and then this is an 80 millimeter long. 75 would be perfect, but this is 80. M10 bolt with a washer as well, and then we're going to sandwich the unicorn nuggets onto the transmission in place of the shifting pin.
Nice. So the next part we're going to do here is the last part of the shifter rebuild outside of course, the new shifter and the assembly. This is the part that goes on the selector rod on the transmission. You see it's got this black, almost full circle ring around it that looks like it would fit in that groove, and it will when it's fully assembled. So on the old part, the black ring will be in the groove. We'll need to force it apart right here in the middle, and then slide it down or slide it off, either way, get it out of the groove. And then you'll see that that frees up the hole there. And that hole right there holds a little dowel pin. And you don't want to lose that pin unless you have a replacement. Don't ask me how I know. So slide that out, take the pin off, then you're going to be able to take this part out. Then putting it on, it's got this kind of foamy thing inside. You're going to have to force that into place, slide the new dowel pin or existing old dowel pin through, and then push the black clip over there to keep the pin in place. The old part's on the right. Nate said he just used a screwdriver, pushed the ring out of the way, and used a 90-degree pick tool to slide the dowel pin out. That's the pin I'm talking about. And now we're going to be ready to put the new one on.
My new part right here. Just press it on and compress the foam that's on the inside here. And when it does, it should allow this pin to drop right in place. It does require a surprising amount of force. Be prepared to push a little bit. So to get this thing in there, I had to brace the back of my four fingers here and press this down as hard as I could with my thumb. And then the dowel pin slid into place. And then I used a pry bar to just make sure that the dowel pin is fully seated in there so it's not going anywhere, which it is. And then now I can take this pry bar and just tap on this black ring until it snaps into place on our new rod end joint for the transmission.
You can use a screwdriver on that too. Just push it in the groove so it snaps and holds the pin in place.
Yep, and just, there we go, just like that.
So we've actually found that it's easiest to insert the shifter ball into the cup like that. You just took the cup at the bottom and slid it up into place and then pressed and it snapped on. Now we're going to use some of this white lithium grease as a lubricant. This is just something we bought at O'Reilly's for $4. You don't need a grease or anything heavy. A couple sprays of this stuff.
Right, and this dries to a dry lubricant. You don't want a wet lubricant here because that'll attract grease or attract dirt, and that'll grind up the plastic pieces.
Right, and just accelerate wear.
Exactly.
So now you can take that and move it all around, and you've got a nicely lubricated ball. Now that we're lubed up, we can install that, noting that there are tabs, wider areas of the cup right here and right here. Once installed, they will need to be rotated into these grooves, cutouts, or windows, whatever you prefer to call it, in the side of the shifter carrier. So install it, push it in as far as it goes, and then you're just going to rotate it so those wider parts stick through the holes and would prevent the entire thing from lifting out of the carrier during operation. This is going to be kind of the setup as we go to install it. So we've installed the shifter into the cup into the carrier, the unicorn nuggets into the carrier, white lithium grease there. We put a little bit of white lithium grease on the rubber, whatever this is, to slide it down there. It will go down further. I've just put it on there now, so we're going to install this from under the car and poke it up through the hole. So now we're ready to reinstall the shifter carrier with the shifter in it. We've got it in this position here. We've got the unicorn nuggets down there at the engine side of it. We're going to put our new south, as I call it, rear end style bushing or type bushing on that end. I've already put the cup in the carrier, the shifter in the cup, and the rubber grommet, rubber bushing, whatever, on there as well. That will slide down later, but we can do that from in the cabin. So now, and this is the only kind of order of operations that works, is to do it this way. So Nate, take over.
Yep, so we're just going to put the shifter up in the hole. I'm going to maneuver the front shifter mount bushings onto the back of the transmission and wiggle that into position as best we can. It is going to be a tight fit because of these solid aluminum bushings. The rubber ones have give, but these aluminum ones do not. And so we'll fine tune that in a moment. And then once those are in the front, we'll run a bolt through them, and then we'll tap this rear into place.
Let's talk about the part numbers now for the shifter and the shifter linkage. So the shifter carrier is part 2. Unless yours is broken for some reason, there's just no reason to replace that. Same deal with your sound deadening, and probably the same deal with your rubber boot here. So assuming all of that's in good condition, let's move on. You definitely want to replace the shift bearing. That's the white plastic cup, as I called it. Part number 3 on the diagram, BMW part number 25111220600. So order one of those. 14 is going to be your rear shifter carrier bushing. And this one is stupid money for the M5. I'm going to give you the M5 part number. It's 25111222652. And I'm about to edit in the part number and price for the 530 part. It is the same part for something like 1/10 the cost. So just save yourself the money and get that one. This is just from the E39 530. It's part number 14 on that diagram, part number 25111222015. Then if you're not going to go with Jed's parts, the unicorn nuggets, those blue aluminum solid bushings, the stock bushings up here, it's part number 13. You'll need 2 of them, 25117507695. If you don't want to do the bolt and nut like Nate did, the original BMW pin is part number 12. That's 25111222375. Now, the stock E39 M5 shifter is number 1, 25117527255, and I will edit in the 545i shifter if you like. That's the only thing that would change. You don't have to change anything else if you're going to do the 545i shifter, just part number 1, shift lever. Now we move on down here. Part number 7 will include 7, 9, and the one that's not even labeled there in between the 5s. That's the one that goes on the transmission selector shaft, so you'll need one part number 7, BMW part number 25117580281. The dowel pin I recommend replacing and are having a spare on hand, BMW part number 23411466134. And then it's always a good idea to have a couple of these little washers on hand. The plastic washer, it says there's 4 of them. I just order like 8 of them. They're 25 cents or so. 2511122000439. Now on my M5, I have the selector rod. I have the UUC dual shear selector rod, the DSSR. I recommend that. It's a little bit trickier to install, but it does kind of alleviate some slop, and it's just a higher quality, heavier component. So, you know, get that from UUC if you wish. Otherwise, it's part number 4. I wouldn't recommend replacing it with a factory one unless yours is bent or otherwise damaged. And then here's this E60 545i shift lever. It's part number 6 on the 545i diagram. BMW part number 25117546373. From inside the car, all I did was verify that we had the shifter the right way. It's either going to go this way or 180 degrees, and you'll immediately be able to tell based on the positioning. This is neutral, clutch in, first, second, third, fourth, so on. Feels really good, short, tight, notchy shifts. Very little in-gear play. Any of that's just due to transmission wear at 162,000 miles. Feels amazing. So now what you can do, since we put that grommet on there before, that rubber part right there, is just kind of go around and pull up all the way around. If it's a clock, every 30 minutes, all the way around the perimeter, and you'll see a little flange come up and seal that hole down to the underside of the car. So now that that's tight, we can take our piece of insulation, lay it back in here, just kind of press it underneath the wood and the console here. That's really just for sound and heat insulation. It just installs like so. And then of course make sure that you dig out your 12-volt line for the limited shifter, which I'll have to do here in a moment. Then we can take our shifter, line it up, make sure you don't pinch the wire in there, and then you're just going to smack it from the top. It'll click into place. Put the boot back in. You're going to be good to go. Done. So here's what things look like when they're done under here. Selector rod fits like that, and we're in the process of installing a new flex disc now. The bolts, if for some reason they get cheap in the future, go ahead and replace them. Right now there's something like $30 a piece, so that seems foolish. And we are putting new nuts on the back because they were cheap.
Shiny new nuts.
And a note on positioning, it'll be the same as the way we took the old one off. The letters, all the numbers, all of that faces us, faces the back of the car.
On the corners here, on the sides, there's little arrows. Arrows pointing back and arrows pointing to the front. The arrows that point to the front go to the transmission bolts, like these. The arrows pointing to the back go to the drive shaft bolts.
The flex disc part number on this diagram is right here. As you can see, obviously you need one of those. That's part number 26112228781. Ignore those prices. Real OEM has horribly out-of-date prices. Your torque spec for the new flex disc to the transmission is 100 pound-feet, or 100 newton meters, or 74 pound-feet. We've got that done. We're ready to reinstall the drive shaft. So we come back here and need to pry off, scrape off all of that old black goop in there.
I'm going to replace that with some fresh stuff. Again, more black goop. The same stuff. It's Butyl rubber sealant. It's the same thing they used to seal the vapor barriers. This is obviously a little bit thicker than what they put on the vapor barriers. So we'll just stick that back up in there, shove the drive shaft in place, and we'll go from there. So with the new Butyl sealant up there and the drive shaft pressed back into place, you have to preload the center shaft bearing. You do that by pulling this thing forward until you have those two little dots. You're basically centered on this nut here, the flanged bolt here. If you don't do that, you can wear out the center shaft bearing because it apparently allows it to flop around too much. I don't know who told me this, but it's just a good idea to do because that's how it comes from the factory.
How time flies when you're having fun. We're put back together, fast forward like 6 hours so far that our light bulb has exploded and no longer works, so we're in the dark and it's like 10:45 at night. Yeah, we got it done for the most part. It's missing an exhaust hanger up there that broke, and there's still some studs in the headers that are going to have to be, I don't know, acetylene torch or something much more robust than what we have access to here at the moment. So put back together, we did the exhaust in one entire section from the headers all the way back to the tips at the end of the mufflers. It's quite heavy. I recommend at least 3 people. We were able to do it with 2, although it was not always the prettiest. So it's back in here, you know, same thing as before. It goes in like it came out. We were able to get all of the actual meat and potatoes work done that we wanted to in the way of the flex disc, the CSB, the shifter bushings. I will leave all the part numbers down in the description below for sure, so check that out. It's just going to have to go to more of an exhaust shop to have the rest of the up here to have that sorted and properly bolted and sealed, because that's definitely going to leak for now. But then we're going to get some new hardware where old hardware has rusted out and stuff like that. Right here, this is a factory zip tie from your PostCat O2 sensor It goes through the chassis here. What we did to put we replaced the zip ties, obviously, because we had to cut them. So I just got the new one, fed it into where the old one was, pulled it through, cut it, and did it that way. Otherwise, you're just going to be poking it and trying to use a pick tool to pull it down. So I recommend that. They only go together one way. You can't plug the post in the pre or the pre in the post or anything like that. It only goes one way. So they were smart with that. And then again, you've got your two black 10 mil plastic bolts there. And I don't think there's anything too special back here. Amazingly, our first try, without even attempting, it's aligned pretty damn well.
We basically just threw it back together.
Seriously though, I mean it's pretty good, and it's going to end up coming off again very soon.
Just a quick note, if you guys are fighting these factory heat shields, these are really flexible. I mean,
you can move them anywhere.
You can move them anywhere. Just bend them out of the way.
Yeah, that's no problem. Now, you do have to maybe sometimes use a U-joint on these outer ones, the 13s, but that's pretty much it. So that's the DIY. Took all day, but we did get it done. So comment with your questions or email.
About 12 hours ago.
Yeah, 12 hours with only an hour break for 5 guys. So thanks for watching this one. We'll talk in the next one. Take care.